Welcome to the Hope Natural Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Erin Ellis, your host. On this show, we discuss all things health, hormones, and happiness with a little side of this thing called life. In 2019, Elwin Robinson suffered from severe digestive issues, causing pain, anxiety, weight loss, and frequent ER visits, despite living a very healthy lifestyle. After countless failed attempts with various health practitioners, he discovered genetic testing in 2021, which provided the answers he needed. This led him to create Genetic Insights, a company that offers affordable and personalized health solutions. Elwin's mission is to empower people with self-knowledge to understand and meet their unique health needs based on their genetic blueprint. I have been diving a lot lately into genetics, so I'm super excited to have this conversation with him. So welcome to the show, Elwin.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, Erin.
Good. Well, before we dive into, genetics, talk a little bit more about really how you struggled with your own health and then how you came about, learning about the genetic component and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Well, short version, both my parents were into health. My dad was a microbiologist and a science teacher. My mother was also a teacher. And my dad also had an organic store back in the 1980s when it wasn't very popular and taught organic farming and stuff like that. So I kind of have a background of it, but I, in my teens and 20s, obviously rebelled and didn't do anything healthy and smoked and drank and took drugs and ate junk food and all the rest of it. But in my late 20s, I decided to clean all that up and decided to eat super healthily, or so I thought. And I did start to feel like really good. And by the time I was 30, I actually started sharing what I'd learned. And for a good 10 years, Erin, I was doing speaking gigs. I had a book, I had online courses, I had a supplement store, I had all of the kind of health stuff that people often have, and a loyal following and all the rest of it. And I thought I was doing great. And then at the age of 39, I started to develop this pain issue around my right side, right rib cage area. And it would sometimes get very bad, like a stabbing pain, to the point that I couldn't function. And any kind of stress made it worse. Most foods, eating made it worse. Any kind of physical exertion made it worse. And so I went to an MD, a normal one first, then a private specialist. I had MRIs, CT, blood, all the rest of it. I kind of thought liver because I was quite, familiar with Chinese medicine at the time. It's certainly around the liver, but they couldn't find anything. And then I went to all kinds of other practitioners, and they couldn't find anything. Functional medicine, naturopath, nutritionist, microbiome specialist, on and on. And then I was like, well, maybe it's a structural issue, that can cause digestive issues. So I went to a chiropractor, physio, osteopath, all kinds of other more obscure things like counter strain and craniosacral and all kinds of stuff. And that didn't help. And then I thought, well, maybe it's an emotional issue. Maybe I'm imagining this, maybe it's a psychological thing. Maybe it's a nocebo effect. So I got into emotional stuff. I saw a therapist for the first time in my life, spiritual stuff, got into Joe Dispenza's work, tried to manifest health, all that kind of stuff. And even that stuff didn't work at all. And I don't dismiss any of those modalities. I think they're all great and all can be very helpful. It's just in my very specific case, it didn't do it. And so, and it got pretty bad at some points. I'm 6'3". I've always been underweight until recently, until I actually started to resolve all this stuff. I was normally 150 pounds, but I got down to 125 pounds, something like that. My metabolism was very low. I felt cold all the time. I was full of anxiety. I couldn't sleep. And I had this stabbing pain. And I know 50% of people over the age of 40 have pains. This is not unusual. This is a very specific type of pain where painkillers either didn't work or even made it worse. So NSAIDs didn't work, which is, again, fairly common for people. But usually when NSAIDs don't work and someone's in really bad pain, they'll then give them some kind of opiate. But this is a kind of pain that opiates actually made significantly worse. So there was no painkiller that was effective. The only thing that kind of worked a bit was taking CBD just to kind of numb out. But that wasn't, any kind of resolution. And so anyway, eventually I was, browsing for stuff. I wasn't really able to work, so I was pretty much researching this stuff, 12 plus hours a day. And I came across this thing that said, if you've ever done a genetic test like 23andMe or something like that, you can upload your data and within a few hours we'll give you all of this information about yourself. And I think I did do 23andMe back like 8 years before. Let me look that up. And I found it and I did the service. And I was blown away at how much information it gave me, how accurate it was, how helpful it was. It didn't provide all the answers immediately to my problems, but it provided enough answers that it helped me work out finally what was going on. There were several root causes, all of them I found through genetics. And I was just blown away. I had that experience. I don't know if you've had it yet, Erin, where I've never been to a psychic or a fortune teller or something and had them like blow my mind with how accurate they were. But this kind of felt like that. I was like, how could they know this information about me? And the thing that really struck me is like a lot of the health problems that they said I had a high risk for, I didn't even have back in 2013 when I initially took that genetic data for the first genetic test. So I just thought, if only I'd have known that I have this high risk, this propensity, I could have prevented most or maybe all of this suffering. And so, my wife tried it. My business partners have tried it. Most of my employees, most of my family, most of my friends, and just, consistently blown away with how accurate it was and helpful it was. And I don't claim it has all the answers, but in many cases it's helped to narrow down, this is the area you need to focus on. This might be the problem. And then we confirm that with blood tests or maybe, urine or saliva tests or something like that and go, yes, okay, that is the thing. And so this is the course of treatment. And when we cross-reference them like that, when we see this tendency of genetics and then we confirm it with additional testing, I found the success rate of whatever the treatment is, whether it's as simple as taking a nutrient that a person is deficient in, or whether it's as complex as dealing with some kind of, complicated hormonal imbalance or something like that. It's very, very effective. It has a very high rate of effectiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to ask, what was it that you found? I need to know what this pain was caused by, because you exhausted all therapies and modalities and medical professions. So what did your genetics tell you?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. So the actual pain, they call it sphincter of Oddi dysfunction or Oddi dysfunction, which is very unusual. You've probably heard of it, but most people haven't. It affects vastly, predominantly women. So I think less than 2% of people who have it. And out of those people, like 90+% is women. So it's very unusual men. So it's no wonder no one had thought of it. And there are, of course, it's one of those things that's a syndrome, like they don't really understand what it is and how to treat it, but there's a few factors. One of them that definitely contributes to it is cholestasis. So cholestasis is when bile becomes thicker and thicker and doesn't flow. And a couple of things I discovered helped me to resolve that. One of them was that I was on completely the wrong diet, which is a big conversation we don't need to go into. But a simple one is that I had a genetic tendency to need way more choline than other people. Choline is, used to be classified as a B vitamin. Then they changed their mind because the body can make its own. So vitamin has to be something you can't make yourself. But some people are not very good at making their own choline. And, I'm one of them. And I had also eaten a super choline deficient diet for decades. Never liked eggs, didn't eat meat. That's pretty much it when it comes to, food sources, never supplemented with it. So I think I'd created, a fairly bad cholestasis with a combination of completely wrong diet and a severe choline deficiency. And so the other thing, which I think is commonly an issue, is toxins. And in my case, I have a genetic that means that my body is not very good at dealing with certain toxins. For different people, it's different things. For some people, it's not even toxins, it's toxin-ish things, like maybe they have an issue of histamines, or oxalates, or salicylates, or lectins, or something like that. For me, it was a heavy metal that I think everyone's heard of, called lead. But I never suspected that. I'd done a hair mineral analysis before, which I think is kind of common. I think even a urine metals test, and there wasn't high lead. But because of this genetic test, I decided to spring for a blood lead, which is expensive. And I did it, and my level was 27 micrograms per deciliter. Yeah, see, your eyebrows are rising. You know what that means. It's really, really high. And like 45 is hospitalization level from a World Health Organization point of view. 0 to 3 is the reference range, and you really want it to be below 1. So mine was 27. And obviously, the hair was low, the urine is low. So obviously my body was not detoxing it very well, which is exactly what my genetics told me would be the case. Now with lead, because it's so hard for your body to detox in general, they usually just focus on exposure. And so I went to the normal, we have a GP here, general practitioner, like a normal doctor they're called. And I shared the results. They didn't believe it because they don't believe in the outside tests. So they tested it again with their NHS tests. And they were like, yeah, these are really, really high. So then with exposure, like, well, my wife has drunk roughly the same water, eaten roughly the same food, taken roughly the same supplements, breathed roughly the same air, ate off the same plates, all the rest of it. So we tested her. They tested her next, and hers was 1, whereas mine was 27. And so we kind of realized, again, looking at the WHO's recommendations, it has a half-life of 20 years. Your body stores it in the bones. I suspect now it's probably been in my bones for a very long time. And the fun thing about having toxins accumulate in your bones is anything that you do to try and be healthy, like exercise and sauna and sunlight and all the rest of it, are all NRF2 upregulators. They all increase the turnaround of that stuff, which then floods more toxicity into your bloodstream, making you feel worse. So that was a fun realization as to why so many things that were supposed to be good for you had actually made me feel worse for such a long time. And I never would have found that without genetics. And when I went to the doctor and I said, this is before I realized it was SOD, I said, could this be the cause of my abdominal pain? Because that's one of the 5 classic symptoms of lead poisoning is abdominal pain. And they said, yeah, that could be it. And I said, okay, what are we going to do about it? And they go, we'll retest in a year. That was it. That was all the mainstream medical professional had in mind. So I had to find my own solutions. And I'll be honest with you, it's not easy to clear. It's still only 6. It's still double like the high end of what it should be. But obviously I feel way better with it at 6 than I did at 27. And then there were hormonal imbalances as well. I have a genetic tendency for high cortisol and a genetic tendency for low thyroid. And those two together, sphincter volley dysfunction, my understanding of it is that it's related a lot to muscle spasms. So when your bile is very toxic, one of the things that can happen is that the body can respond by spasming. And if you have a tendency for high stress, which high cortisol and low thyroid will tend to leave you with, adrenaline dominance, then you're more likely to have these spasms. And so as I started to correct those hormones, reduce the cortisol, sort out the thyroid, I think that spasming then reduced and then eventually stopped. So it's a very complicated case. Most of the people I work with, it's way simpler than that. But
yeah, no, it's super fascinating. So the genetic test said that you had a disposition for the sphincter of Oddi. Is that how?
I wish it had, because then I could have worked it out a lot quicker. Like I said, I had to kind of deal with these separate things to eventually.
Oh, okay. I was like, how did you get to that? Because it's rare.
Yeah, well, it was first of all one doctor who specialized in SIBO. Then she recommended going to what they called a specific type of visceral manipulation practitioner who specialized in this specific type, and then that's what they said. And then I remember that another person had said it before, a counter strain practitioner, but I'd kind of dismissed it because I felt that they were a bit like, woo woo. And then I went with my new doctor, who's an MD. She confirmed that it sounds exactly like it.
Yeah.
And,
okay.
But I had all the signs of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And treating it as if that's what it is has helped to resolve it. So there we go.
Yeah, super cool. So what recent discoveries in genetic testing have changed healthcare the most, in your opinion?
Have changed healthcare? God, not enough. I mean, should change healthcare? Will change healthcare soon? I think would be a question I'd be more confident answering. I mean, if you're talking about mainstream healthcare, really all they're focusing on is like these very niche, fringe, extreme issues. This is my problem with healthcare in general. And I don't know if it's a bit different in your country, but certainly in my country, as the lead example I gave a few minutes ago exemplifies, like if you're not if the thing you have means that you're not dying right now or could not die soon, they're basically not interested. And so I would say, and that's because the whole system is kind of based on need, right? Whoever's has the highest need is the ones that they prioritize at the top of the pile. But then, that means that only the things that are the most serious are dealt with. My issue with that is obviously that, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. And so a lot of the time they're waiting until things get really bad before they deal with them. That's not the right way to deal with things in my mind. So yeah, because of that's how the whole mainstream healthcare system is set up, the approach to genetics is the same, right? They're looking for very specific genetic issues that have extreme consequences that they can screen for and all the rest of it. What I would love is if they would start taking on more of the kind of stuff that that we share with people. And, some of them do, like we work with a few MDs, for instance, now, fairly young, I hope to make it more. And certainly, other people, functional medicine doctors, they're often quite open to it. Naturopaths, there's various other specialties that is using it more. And with them, I would say it's it's the being able to prevent things, which is the most groundbreaking. That like something as simple as a nutritional deficiency, and we're quite early with this, but even like specific amino acids, like forget about the obvious stuff like vitamin D3 or magnesium, which again I think is starting to filter into mainstream a little bit more, or B12, things like that. But like even something like a genetic need for like more L-tyrosine, or a genetic need for more glycine. I'm seeing that these like seemingly very small things have like a major impact on people's health that sometimes has affected them for decades. That as soon as you correct them, they start feeling better to a miraculous degree. Sounds like you've had a similar experience. So just I would say like that fine tuning, and ditto with hormones. Again, the obvious stuff is maybe your progesterone, your estrogen, your testosterone, your cortisol. But, like other things like oxytocin, like seeing if someone has a genetic tendency to low oxytocin, they're going to have a very specific personality type. They're going to have a very specific, tendencies, very specific, often psychological and emotional issues. And it's just amazing where, either encouraging things that promote oxytocin, or even sometimes just, getting them to a doctor that will give them some intranasal oxytocin, it's like life-changing for them, as much as progesterone is for women or testosterone is for men. So I would say that's really interesting to me, because it's often for things that are not easy to test for. Like it's not easy to test someone's oxytocin. It's not easy to test their dopamine levels, stuff like that. So in that case, the genetic tendency is very helpful, because we don't have like an easily available, actually accurate blood test that can give us that. So seeing the genetics for like root cause issues, to me, that's a root cause issue. A nutritional deficiency, a toxin excess, a hormonal, excess or deficiency, or neurotransmitter excess and deficiency. Those are like root cause issues that will profoundly affect how you feel, how you view life, the decisions you make, and all the rest of it that, are super important to address, which genetics can really help with.
Yeah. So it sounds like, and through my own journey here recently with doing more genetic things, I feel like it should be part of, conventional care, or like maybe even like the first step in someone's treatment plan when they come to me, or, a practitioner with X, Y, and Z. It's like, all right, well, let's see what we're dealing with as far as your genetic makeup is concerned. But oftentimes it's kind of the last thing, with unexplained symptoms that you went through years of testing and treatment and appointments and got no answers, and then discovered the whole genetic component. So the unfortunate part is it's typically not covered by insurance. So a lot of, patients are hesitant to test their genetics because of that component. Is that fair?
Well, yes. And that is why I created Genetic Insights, to try and make it as simple as possible, because a lot of those platforms, I think they need interpreting by a professional or an expert, which I think that's very cost prohibitive, because usually they're expensive and, as you say, often not covered by insurance. But the second thing is, the genetic testing itself can be expensive. So, with our platform as an example, the very most expensive thing, which gives you access to 500 reports, thousands of pages, every piece of information, the highest price is $197, and we usually offer, like when I'm on a podcast like this, like a 25% coupon. So about less than $150 to have lifetimes worth of information about so much. You could spend a long time reading it. We're talking about, again, thousands of pages, 500 reports, probably hundreds of thousands of pages. So not that you need to read all that, but just that information is available to you should you wish to delve into something. So actually, I'd say cost per useful information is the best value of all. And I say I'm not against blood tests. I'm not against any other tests. I'm actually a big fan and always recommend them to people. But to help to narrow that down, like what tests are worth paying for, I think it pays for itself almost immediately. And with the medical practitioners I have been able to work with so far, they 100% agree. And so I have a program. I call it my 7-step rejuvenation blueprint. I'll tell you just within less than 60 seconds. But the first step is genetics. Second step is nutritional deficiencies. Third step is excesses, usually toxins. Fourth step is hormonal balance. Fifth step is lifestyle and environmental factors. Sixth step is chronic infections, and the seventh step is emotional, psychological well-being. To me, that's the order. I mean, every person is different, but that's usually the order that I would work in. I would start with genetics because that tells me the broadest information about all the other 6 issues, including the emotional issues potentially. Someone has a tendency for borderline or depression or anxiety or obsessive compulsive or whatever. That's like super useful information to know, right at the outset. And then, nutritional things to me, not that they're necessarily, I'm actually surprised at how often just ascertaining a nutritional need and filling it does make people feel significantly better. It's more than I thought when I created them, honestly. But obviously it's not always. But, it's so simple, right? It's so simple to give someone a vitamin or amino acid or a mineral to encourage them to eat more foods that contain it. And it can be life-changing. Toxins and chronic infections usually are the most complicated to deal with. So sometimes, I skip to hormones next. But I'm actually amazed at how much you can make people feel better just by kind of balancing their hormones and giving them the nutrients that they need. And I feel like if someone comes in and they're feeling like a 5 out of 10, you can get them to like an 8 out of 10 just by doing that. And then often when you do like detoxing or dealing with infections like SIBO and all that kind of stuff, it makes you feel worse. So then they might go back down to a 6 out of 10 when they're dealing with that stuff. But at least they don't feel worse than when they first come in. So that's why I love starting with the genetics, and I encourage people to do that. And that's what my book forthcoming is, encouraging. And again, it's not the whole thing. I don't pretend, a lot of people out there, whatever their thing is, they try and tell you that's the whole thing and that's all you need to do. And I don't claim that for a second, but I 100% agree with you. It's, it would make so much more sense the first step.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when it comes to genetics, it's obviously something that, one, we just need to test for once, right? Like our genes are what we're born with. It's not necessarily something that changes as we age, correct?
Yeah, and let me clarify that because there are some types of genetic tests that do work with epigenetics. So
can you explain what epigenetics is?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you just said is 100% correct. But just to expand on it. So we work with something called SNPs, which stands for single nucleotide polymorphisms. And the way I explain it to people is like, you're basically made up from this scientific perspective of like very, very, very long line of code. It feels like a document with like a bunch of code. And so a SNP is just one variation of that code, one letter that's different. That's called a SNP. So that's where the S comes from, the single. And so that is something that is there the day you're born, is there the day you die, and is there every day in between. That doesn't change. Now, in our reports, we offer 2 things. We offer a risk score, but then we also offer recommendations. In fact, most of the reports, like most of the content is recommendations. So if you weren't able to do anything about having a high risk for something, recommendations would be pointless, right? And yet it's most of our report. If all we could do is tell you have a high risk of something, I wouldn't do it. Like this, I wouldn't have dedicated my life to this guy. I 100% believe in, personal empowerment and all the rest of it. So the fact, why is it that we can do something about it if this is something that we're born with and something that never changes? Because the expression of a specific gene whether this SNP has a specific impact or not, we often, not always, but often can do something about. A lot of the time it's like, it's an enzyme, which is a little chemical transformation factory. And a lot of it is related to how quickly or how efficiently that transformation occurs. And so there are things we can do to speed that up. And there are things that we can do if we wish to, sometimes it's good, to slow that process down. And so that's where all the recommendations come in. So that's epigenetics. People, I think there's a big philosophical part of this. Some people love to believe in free will, and some people love to believe in fate. Generally, it's the people who are doing really well or really badly who love to believe in fate. And then those of us in the middle who like to believe in free will, like I could improve my position in the world. And so, philosophically, personal development, manifestation, law of attraction, all those kind of people, they very much believe in, I create my own reality, I can manifest my own destiny, all that kind of stuff. And I suppose the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of, mentality that comes from that similar kind of place as well. And so if you have that kind of belief, often genetics are quite unpleasant to you. You don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear that you're born of all these, innate deficits. And I was one of those people. I really didn't want to hear it. I wanted to believe that I could create my own reality and choose my own destiny. I didn't want to think that I had all these things that were just set in stone. But the truth is, and some people ask me to quantify it, I would say about 40 to 50% is set in stone and about 50 to 60% is changeable. And so there's a lot that we can still change. And that's based on looking at, hundreds of our reports. Every report is different, but that's, roughly an average-ish. And so there is a lot you can change. And so epigenetics is what you can change. It's like which things you do express. And so there are some tests available, which are usually way more expensive than ours, and which you would have to keep doing because they keep changing, but which do like tell you how you're doing, like a DNA methylation test that can tell you, are you older than you actually should be, and based on different markers and stuff like that. So that's a different thing. That's not what we do. We work
You're
with,
referring
as you
to
said, the stuff that doesn't change.
Yeah. So you were referring to the DNA, like oxidative stress type testing.
I'm talking about like a true age report, for instance, like it's a DNA methylation. So DNA methylation, as far as I'm aware, unless I'm not 100% up to date, is still considered the most accurate way of assessing that a person's true biological age. They used to focus on telomeres, for instance. And you can still do telomere tests as well, but it's not that reliable. So DNA methylation is, can tell you, if you're 10 years younger than you actually are, or 10 years older in terms of how much your DNA has aged. But it's expensive and you got to keep doing it, obviously. So I want to share something because a lot of my audience knows I'm going through a lot of self-discovery with why things are happening to me, and it's going down to the genetics. And you mentioned, you can have these SNPs and they can be fast or slow. Well, for instance, I have a slow COMT, and a COMT is a big genetic marker. So I have a slow COMT, which guess what? It means that I'm not able to like break down my excitatory transmitters very well. So I have trouble with focusing. I have trouble with adrenaline-like activities because I just basically get flooded with all of these neurotransmitters because I have this slow COMT. So you can fix that and you can nurture it and, help the slow COMT out. But also too, like finding that out is so helpful from like my own personal brain. Like why do I get freaked out by adrenaline activities, or why do I have so much anxiety over this? Like, I don't know, it's fun, etc. But it makes sense when you understand that from a chemical neurotransmitter genetic disposition. So it's just fascinating when you learn these things about yourself, and then it's like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. Or, when you were talking about hormones and fertility and things like that, it's like, well, maybe there's an issue with something going on for fertility purposes instead of, being sad and depressed and like, oh my gosh, why can't I make a baby? This is like, well, hey, maybe we should address the genetic component and see if we're missing something or whatever the case may be. So that's why I'm such a huge fan of really it's root cause. It's more of a root cause. It's like,
all right, well, I was born with this. But like you said, we can fix some things and nurture them so that they don't become an issue. But like even for yourself, you don't make enough choline and you weren't eating any choline-rich foods. And choline is so important for so many different things. I have the same issue. I'm super deficient in choline and I eat a lot of eggs, but I have a SNP that's not able for me to like metabolize it. Same thing with vitamin D. It's like I take vitamin D, but guess what? I have a SNP that I can't metabolize the vitamin D. So I have to be a little bit more diligent with it, take higher doses, take things that help absorption like vitamin K, magnesium, things like that. So it's really interesting when you dive in and then you're less likely to like beat yourself up over, well, why is this happening? It's like, man, I take this. Why isn't it working? Or I eat this. Why isn't it working? And then it's just like, well, maybe your body can't do that. So we give your body what it needs so that you can do that. So it's really, really helpful. So I love what you're doing. Yeah. We could probably talk for another hour about this, but we're running out of time. I'm going to wrap it up with one question that I ask all of my podcast guests. What would be your best or favorite health tip that you can share with the audience?
Well, it's funny, just to comment on what you were saying, and it will answer the question. I feel like the type of health advice that's still the most popular and common these days, even the alternative world, forget the mainstream, is kind of one size fits all, right? This is the right diet. No, this is the right diet. This is the right exercise regime. No, this is. My one tip to people would be that there is no one tip. There is literally nothing that I have found that is universally beneficial for all people's health. So my one tip would be like personalize your health advice as much as possible. Yeah. With genetics, with other testing, with experimentation, right? Just trying stuff by all means. It doesn't have to be testing, especially if you're very low on money. But don't believe that just because something works for someone else, it's going to work for you. People ask me sometimes what I eat, and I'm like, I can tell you, I think it's in one of my episodes, but it's like, but it's irrelevant. Like every single thing that I eat may be poison for you, and every single thing that may be good for you might be poison for me. Like, for some people, saunas are fantastic. For some people, cold showers are fantastic. For a few people, both. For a few people, neither. But for some people, it's terrible to cool yourself even more. For some people, it's terrible to sweat. Even exercise. Well, exercise is good for everyone. That's kind of true. Like, we're not meant to be sedentary the whole time. But for some people, brisk walking is probably perfect for them. For some people, it's, extremely high intensity aerobics. Some people, it's extremely high intensity resistance training. Like, there is no universal that's good for everyone. So like, find what's good for you, find what works for you, and do that. And don't be swayed by any of the people out there who tell you this is the right thing, this is the right diet, this is the right thing for everyone. As soon as they say it's right for everyone, and as soon as they start, especially when people question like, oh, this didn't work for me, they're like, you must be doing it wrong. That's a real red flag,
Yeah,
just
for sure.
Find what works for you personally.
Great advice. And that's so true. I've been dealing with that myself. It's like, oh, you should eat like this, or you should eat this. I'm like, that doesn't really work for me. So you have to experiment and learn what's best for you. So Elwin, this was amazing. We'll give you all a coupon code for his genetic service. It'll be on geneticinsights.co. We'll have everything linked in the show notes, including how you can find him and learn more about his testing. So again, thank you for being here, and we'll see you all again next week.